This is the Iron Sharpens Iron Movement, sharing insights into the power of people-centric leading.
Hi, this is Jim, and today we welcome to our tribe someone whose insight and expertise has made her a sought-after speaker on hiring, leadership development, and succession planning. She's a frequent contributor to Entrepreneurial Online, About.com, and Talent Culture, just to name a few. Let's go beyond the hype of employee engagement to discuss the practical mechanisms for really making it happen. This is Beth Miller. Iron Sharpens Iron Movement is brought to you by N2 Growth, a leader in executive search, leadership development, and talent management. We find and develop the world's best leaders. Learn more about our practice by visiting us at n2growth.com or click on the link in the show notes of this podcast. Hi, Beth. Welcome to the Iron Sharpens Iron Movement. Our tribal listeners is really excited to listen to a high-powered executive coach like yourself. So again, welcome to the tribe.
Well, thank you, Jim. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
I tell you, we've, for our listening audience, Beth and I, we actually had a conversation for almost an hour the other day getting ready for the podcast. And ever since then, Beth, I have been excited and waiting for today because I think you're going to provide some real value to the tribal listeners that we have. And I want to really, I've read your background as the lead in, but I want folks to understand some of the places that you've come from to where you've been around some really high-powered individuals besides yourself, of course. You served as a chair with Vistage, and for those that aren't familiar, that's one of the most prestigious CEO and business owner kind of advisory organizations in the world. And I'd love to kind of, sit here on the couch with you and talk about what were some of the things that you saw? What were some of the things that you heard? What were some of the things that you observed with dealing with these high-powered peers? And what advice were you giving them?
Wow, that's a really broad question.
Yeah.
I was a chair for a little over 13 years.
Wow.
So I saw it all. So I really did. There were a variety of industries that I dealt with, different size organizations, generally 20 employees, upwards of, 200, 300 employees. So the challenges obviously were different when it came to somebody with a 20-person company versus a 300. There were, from a leadership perspective, they one of the things that I found often was the good leaders were really good listeners. And those that needed some work in listening, I spent a lot of time with those individuals because they tended to revert back to kind of what worked in the past. Versus, hey, we're in a different world now, and you need to be, questioning your employees and listening to them because they're closer to the business than you are.
It's interesting. Were you pretty aggressive in finding that out, discovering that in one of your first sessions with the individuals that you were advising, coaching, and all those kind of things? Because, listening is a competency in leadership that is not very, talked about very often.
Yeah, it's. I think it's undervalued, and I think part of it is, especially for entrepreneurs, which a lot of the individuals in Vistage are entrepreneurs. They've started their business, and they have this sense of, I've got a problem and I need to solve it, versus going to their teams and having their teams solve it for them. And I see that a lot also recently with COVID, and these companies, these leaders feel like they need to take all the responsibility on themselves, and that's not real healthy.
Is it an ego thing?
It's partly ego, but I think it's also the fact that leaders are trying to care for their employees more. they realize that they're under stress and are anxious. So putting a additional requirements and additional stress in helping the leader solve significant problems is something that they're not doing as much as they had pre-COVID. So so it's something that I encourage leaders to do, because it's not all about them. They should have good team members around them that they can rely on, and those team members are closer to the problems and the situations than the entrepreneur leader.
Yeah, the last thing you want is the leader to be bearing the burden of everything on their shoulders. It just leads to low resiliency. They will burn out quicker. They will just collapse.
Yes.
And obviously, as someone that focuses on high performing organizations like yourself, that is one of the death blows for someone that just looks inward instead of outward, for sure.
Correct. Yeah. Exactly.
So so I'm a young entrepreneur, and I've got all the answers. I've come up with the greatest widget, now I've gone through some fundraising, I'm ready to roll, and I think I know it all. And then I have you as my mentor. And one of the things you say to me is, well, you don't listen very well.
Right.
What are your recommendations? How do you get somebody to be an active listener?
Well, I think there are a couple things. One is to get them to learn how to ask good questions, because the questions will uncover issues and solutions. But if you're focused on asking what I call recall questions, kind of who did what, versus the reflective questions of what can we do differently, or how can we approach this differently, then those are the questions that get an individual to self-reflect and come up with some good ideas. But you've got to, as a leader, not have the notion that you've got the right solution. You've got to go into the question really being curious and wanting to hear other ideas and be open-minded. The good leaders have that. They're open-minded. They understand their biases, and they're willing to listen to opinions that they may disagree with.
Yeah, I've always been a big fan of the term active listening, because for me at least it triggers that when I say I need to actively listen, or when I talk to someone about you need to actively listen. For me, it mentally triggers the fact that I am not thinking of my answer already to the question I've just asked. That people get so fogged in that, and that active listening is truly the 2 ears, 1 mouth kind of theory, for sure. And
exactly.
I love your point though, Beth, about, it's about the questions. It's about learning how to ask the right questions. I grew up being taught that a critical thinking question can never be answered with a yes, no, or maybe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
yeah.
It's so funny. Most people, I think, have the notion that leadership is just this natural thing. Oh, he's a natural born leader, or she sure can lead this group. The realities are, this is something that you have to work at every single day. You can't rest on your laurels at all. And if you're a true leader, you're always learning things. And I guess that's the premise of this Iron Sharpens Iron movement too, is right. It's like others bringing others on board here for this podcast to learn from each other, right? To hear things and hear from your experience.
Yeah. And leadership comes in all different flavors. There's I do a lot of assessments for hiring and also for leadership development, and I use this tool called Business DNA, and they have 10 styles. Well, I had somebody recently say, "Well, what's the best style for a leader?" I said, "There is no best style for a leader."
You're right. Exactly right.
Yeah.
So So let's get into assessments a little bit because it's such a big tool in the toolkit for a coach. What are your beliefs on assessments? In today's world, are most people pushing back on assessments? Are people embracing? Is it generational? What's your vibe on assessments out there?
I think assessments are being used more today than they were in the past, um, especially from a hiring perspective. Um, there's there's a tendency from a hiring perspective, especially for smaller companies, to do the interview and and focus on the skills and experience and make a decision. Uh, a really good hiring process includes an assessment that is validated for hiring purposes. So, for instance, um, the traditional ones that I see in smaller companies is like a DISC or a Myers Briggs,
Yep,
and
very mainstream names.
they're very mainstream names. Yep, but the problem is they're not validated for hiring, and I run into that a lot, and I have to explain to them that if you really want to use an assessment for hiring purposes and be legal about it, you because you can get into a world of hurt using an assessment that isn't validated for hiring purposes. Um, so there's making sure that it's validated for hiring, and then the assessment should provide you with additional data over and above the interview that you're going to be having with the candidate. And the interview, you really should be doing behavioral interviewing skills. Um, those are the interview questions that are going to uncover past experiences that will tie back to the skills and competencies that you're looking for in that specific position.
Yeah, it's real interesting. When most people think of hiring, they're just like, I'll go out there, I'll find the resumes, or I'll have someone find resumes for me. I'll narrow it down. We'll do the interviews, and away we go. And they really don't understand kind of the essence of what you're getting after. Of you haven't even peeled back that first layer of the onion yet, and you have to check under the hood. And you
Yeah.
can't just do that with a resume check and that they knocked it out of the park. You would hope if you have pre-screen people and you bring them in for the interview that they are going to knock it out of the park because you've already looked at this as potentially a seasoned person.
Right.
You
Yeah.
need more than that for sure.
They do. And the thing I find is that most managers and leaders have never been trained on interviewing and how to give an effective interview. And for smaller companies, there's no consistent process.
Very true. Non from person to person, there certainly isn't, and most small organizations really don't have a robust HR, if they have an HR at all,
Right.
on how they will do that. It's so true, and it's a great point too. You can take a lack of interviewing skills and transfer that over to even a lack of ability to understand leadership development. Because if they weren't developed correctly, how do they know what right looks like? And how would you develop a subordinate below you? And it's to the same effect of if they were never interviewed correctly or taught that, then how would you expect that person to know how to interview?
Exactly. In fact, I haven't checked on this recently, but when I was designing a training class on hiring, I had found this is 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. I found that there was a video out on YouTube of a Stanford MBA class, and the fact was that they hadn't been trained on interviewing, but they were starting. I mean, here's an MBA class, right? Um, and there's I would hope at this point that MBA um, courses cover good interviewing skills.
Right?
I mean, it's a basic, right?
You would think.
Yeah.
You would think. Yeah, it's interesting. Do you how do you describe to, let's say you have a client that's hired you to help through this interviewing process or through this assessment process, help coach them through this or advise them. When you talk about behavioral skills, what are some of the things that you're looking at? And not only from a behavioral question point of view, but back to assessments. If you're looking for, do you believe? Because again, in my coaching experience, that there's probably 50% of the people are believers in behavioral analysis, and 50% could care less, do not believe in them, think it's it's witchcraft, all of that kind of stuff.
Yes.
What are
Yeah.
your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm a believer.
Yeah.
But there are leaders that I've run into who aren't, and there's definitely a challenge there, to bring data to them, obviously from an assessment standpoint, that will show them that if they are clear on the competencies of the position, that an assessment along with a behavioral interviewing set of questions that relate back to the competencies, those two items will increase the success rate of the hiring process. And it's expensive to hire somebody, even when you're
Absolutely.
recruiting from using an internal resource to recruit versus a recruiter from the outside. It's still expensive. You're spending time and money to attract qualified candidates and then bring them through the interviewing process. And if in fact you make a misstep in the hiring process and 6 months later you're having to rehire, that's doubly expensive.
Absolutely. Hire slow, fire fast, and
That's correct.
that hire slow, part. Everybody needs to be disciplined about it.
Yeah, and hire slow is, with the talent shortage, you can't make it too slow,
That's the great
right?
point. That's
Because
right.
there are people out there that are interviewing for multiple positions, and in fact, I was just talking to a client the other day where he had two candidates. Well, now he's down to one candidate.
Yeah, isn't that a problem? Do you find that as a problem out there with your clients of like indecision paralysis? That if you present with two very equal type candidates, that they either are paralyzed by being able to choose from one of the two, or if they're like, "Hey, you found me two great candidates. How about a third?" you know,
Right, exactly. Yeah.
they get paralyzed and really are afraid to pull that trigger.
And oftentimes that comes from past experience of something that happened that didn't work for them in the past, and they're gun shy.
So let's transition in that. So, okay, we're gun shy. We've been burnt in the past. I'm a senior executive. I don't have, from a young organization, I don't have all that amount of hiring and interviewing expertise, but I really want to build a team. This is another one of your expertise, Beth, here is working with high potentials. So what are some of those things that you give as general advice when, okay, what again does that right candidate kind of look like? And when you go to working with high potentials, what is your definition of a high potential organization? What does it look like?
Yeah. So one of the first things I have a conversation with leaders about is the difference between high performers and high potentials. And that
Words
can,
matter.
yeah, and that can get confusing. I am oftentimes called in to coach somebody who's been promoted into a higher level position because they were a high performer, but the organization hadn't really defined what high potential looked like for the organization, and that's kind of the root cause. So understanding what high potential looks like for your organization is really important. And one of the ways you go about doing that is identifying some people that you've promoted in the past and have been successful, and then identifying what are the qualities about that person that made them successful. There's generally three things to be looking for. One is that aspiration. Do they really aspire and want to move up in the organization? That's one. And the second thing is engagement. Do they go out of their way to look for opportunities that challenge them and are stretching them? Do they, continually grow and are self-starters? Are they taking initiative?
So do you find I love the different. I love that you're calling out there's a huge difference between a high performer and a high potential. And so do you find, in some organizations, someone that's a high performer that loves their job, absolutely loves tactically what they're doing. And is this what you're getting at for aspiration and
Yes,
all that? Because there are many people that are like, I am happy where I'm at. I do not want to be a manager. I don't want to
exactly.
be a part of the management team at all. I want to work on widgets.
Yep. And I generally find those individuals are the ones that are subject matter experts in something, and they love their craft. They and the idea of taking time away from their craft in order to lead and manage individuals is not something that they desire. And I've seen it happen in the past, and part of the issue is that leaders aren't having that career conversation with their employees.
Yeah, it's interesting. There are many people, many. I would actually argue most that if they are high engagement and low aspiration, but yet high performing. That's almost the definition of a subject matter expert that loves to be vertical, not horizontal, in their leadership styles. They just love to do the widget, whatever it is,
Exactly. Yep.
and very happy. And you can exploit that, right? You
Right.
can make that a high performance player on a team because they are very much focused in what they do. But you do have to call it for what it is. And if they don't want to advance, to your point about aspiration, if they don't have both, right,
Right.
aspiration and engagement, that's not going to be a potential.
Exactly. And those individuals, you can leverage those individuals, for instance, in training others. They are well versed, and getting that's a way of broadening their responsibilities. Is giving them the opportunity to do some trainings so that they can share their craft with others.
In the military, we used to call them sled dogs. Who are your sled dogs? The ones that are just happy doing what they want to do, heads down, enjoy it, love it, but have no aspirations at all to be the lead dog,
Yep.
And all of that. And that's
And you
fine,
don't
right?
right, and you don't want everybody
Yeah.
wanting
Because
to
then
be
who's doing
leaders.
the work?
Right, exactly. Exactly.
So is Beth, is one of the key factors that you're trying to uncover here when you're looking for high potentials, when you're trying to define what a high potential looks like. One of the must-haves, and you said it, and we kind of just glossed over it, was you've got to be talking to your people. You've got to be having these career development plans. You've got to be having, these conversations with your people to discover what they want from a career.
Yes. Yep. And those I encourage all leaders, and I think a lot of them are doing this now, more so than maybe 10 years ago. And that's having those one-to-one conversations on a regular basis with their employees. And if they're having those regular conversations with them, there's a performance review is just documentation. There are no surprises because they've been having the conversation on a regular, once a week or every other week kind of rotation, that the employee doesn't have any surprises when a performance review comes up.
Yep. And do you find on the engagement side? So
Mm-hmm.
like I've had many conversations on these podcasts about the importance of employee engagement, and the real reality is that most employees are disengaged out there and everything. So do you find that low employee engagement equates to low human interaction from leadership, these one-on-one conversations and all that? If they're not having these conversations, does it tend to lead to low employee engagement?
I would say yes. I think that, one of my the things that I often say is that, people leave managers, they don't leave companies. And it's the relationship with the manager that is critical. And that's the area where companies really need to focus on development of those line managers and mid managers, because they're the ones that can really make or break a company.
So if you have a client that brings you in, Beth, solve all my problems. I want this high performing team, and I want you to help me to identify high potentials to place on the bench. Is one of your first comments, let me talk to the line managers first to see where you're at as a baseline?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I would, and I'd want to understand, who are the managers who are retaining the really good employees. They're because they're the ones that may have some of the secret sauce for the organization. And how do you translate their techniques and behaviors to other leaders within the organization?
So, do you have these conversations when you find those line managers? Are you getting to the point about, can these managers actually identify and will they internally coach fellow team members and their subordinates?
Yeah, coaching. I'll tell you that coaching is probably the number one skill that when managers understand how to do um, and do it well, they can truly gain higher level of engagement with employees and better results. And that's actually something that I have a workshop on that I've delivered to a number of my clients, is teaching managers how to coach.
But Beth, if I'm a small company, I only got 50 employees. I thought that coaching thing is like for those Fortune 500, giants and the executive coaching, and it's all, $100,000 a month stuff.
Yeah, so that's why if you can teach your managers how to coach, then you don't have to bring people like myself in to coach.
And would you say what's the appropriate level for coaching? I mean, has coaching changed through the years? Because again, I think a lot of the stigma for when people think about executive coaching is it's C-suite only, high end, high dollar, high touch kind of things.
Yeah, coaching is a really covers the gamut now. There's, I will coach, high potentials, and I will, coach the C-suite. And generally, I will start with like the high potentials, and then move upwards. Um, there have been times where I've started at the C-suite and moved down, but oftentimes it's those high potentials, because generally those high potentials are millennials, and millennials demand development and growth.
Yes.
And having a coach is a big deal to them. They it shows them that the company is willing to invest in them.
Hmm. And what does a normal for people that are not familiar really with coaching in general, and let's say it's with a high potential, what does a coaching session basically look like? I mean, are you calling this person every day at 8 on their drive to
No,
work and going, "Hey, Sally, how was today?"
no, no. Generally, we define up front, what are the uh, 2 or 3 development opportunities for them as it relates to the core competencies of the organization,
Mm-hmm.
and create a development plan. And I help coach them through that plan. So generally, up front, they'll have some homework to do, and it, there's a lot of reading and videos that they'll watch. And what they're doing is they're gaining some baseline knowledge, and then we'll explore how they can apply that baseline knowledge to um, the workplace, and who's going to provide them that relevant feedback as they're trying to, say, for instance, enhance their strategic thinking or whatever.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And so the conversations are generally twice a month for the first 4 or 5 months, and then on the back end, we we go down to like once a month. But I'm always available if they're having, because most of the issues are relationship issues. So I'm
Isn't it always?
yeah. So I'm always available for text and email in between our scheduled conversations when they're dealing with some significant issues.
This is not intended to be a trick question, but I've asked people this in the past, and I'm always interested on people's gut reactions to this. Is there a difference between coaching and mentoring?
Yes.
Okay, all right, that was quick. You
Yeah.
were almost ready for it.
Yeah. Yeah. So mentoring is really about sharing experiences and knowledge, and helping an individual kind of broaden their network. It's um, it's coaching is really about challenging the individual, um, asking lots of questions versus providing information. So
Yeah, great definition.
there's definitely a difference. But
I love it.
there's oftentimes when I'm coaching, when I have to switch on the mentor hat. But I know when I'm doing it.
So, Beth, have you seen in your experience in the last few years is there a culture shift in organizations and embracing diversity and inclusion? Is there a greater focus from your perspective on bringing in female leaders, an emphasis on diversifying in all aspects organizations? Has there been a true, is it still lip service, or has there been a true movement to change organizational mindsets?
you know, I would have to say, based on my experience with smaller companies, it's a lot harder to do.
Hmm.
Unless you've got a really enlightened founder leader
Mm-hmm.
who's truly committed to diversity, it it's a slow process. Yeah.
How do you what are some of your actionable tasks to a leader when you're talking about looking at creating a high performing organization? What is your D&I kind of discussions, and have you found personally through your coaching and your experiences the power within a diversified team?
Yes. Um, I have, and that's especially when the the company is getting ready to hire, like, for a key position. um, that's when I'll have the conversation with them. Hey, guys, and it's guys. Here's an opportunity to diversify your team, and how are you going to go about identifying individuals who are going to be able to bring the right skills and competencies to your organization, that will also diversify the team from a thought process and experience process. And there, when you don't have a diverse team, you are leaving yourself open to competitors that are becoming more diversified, that can be more innovative because they're getting a more diverse thoughts and ideas.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I just did a podcast with Jeff DeGraff. He's known as the Dean of Innovation. And one of his famous quotes is, "Without diversity, you will not have innovation. And innovation is the key diversity is the key to having an innovative team. And without that foundation, you will never grow and go to the next levels. You just can't, because you just don't have that different perspective on whatever it is.
But it's also important to realize that you also need to have that inclusion.
That's correct.
Right? I mean, you can hire somebody who looks different than you and has a different experience, but if they don't feel included in the decision-making process, you're going to lose them.
It's funny. I saw a graphic the other day that was the very best explanation of diversity and inclusion that I ever saw. It's so simple. It was a picture of like a 100-piece puzzle piece set, and the puzzle pieces were all scattered on the table, and below it said, "That's diversity." 100 individual puzzle pieces. And then the next picture was the puzzle that was complete.
Yeah.
And they said, "That's inclusion."
I love that. Yeah.
And I was like, bam, that's a Shazam moment right there. I think that's a great explanation of diversity and then inclusion and the importance of it and what that actually does.
Yep. Yeah. No, I love that. I'm gonna use that one.
Steal it away. Steal it away. So Beth, as we're wrapping up here, talk to me a little bit about, this whole conversation has kind of centered around, talent management and, how do we deal with it from kind of beginning to end, and some of the weak spots and some of the points that we should all look at. From your viewpoint, what would be one of those things that you would want to leave this audience with on how they view talent acquisition, talent management, and just talent in general?
Well, I would want them to remember that talent is their greatest asset. And if you manage and deploy your talent effectively, you're going to get, for those individuals who are more financially motivated and relate to, you're going to get a higher return on your investment. And people are the biggest investment that you have in your organization.
Without a doubt. It's something that someone like you coming in and going, "Okay, stop it with the fancy things. Don't need a bell, don't need a whistle, don't need a smoke, don't need a mirror. You just need to understand about how important people are to the organization." And then from that point, bringing in the knowledge of someone like a Beth into the fold so that we can high tune it to be the most effective organization out there. Beth, I really appreciate your perspectives on talent, on people management, how to really look to create a high performing organization through the use of the way that you define high potentials. Very eye-opening today.
Well, thank you. I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks for joining our leadership movement this week. Talking to Beth drives home the point that as leaders, we should all be talent obsessed. Don't forget our show notes are posted on the website with key leader takeaways. And be sure to subscribe and tell a friend so we can continue to build the tribe. Until next time, remember that iron sharpens iron. Make yourself and others better every single day.